Hey guys, what is up? My name is Megan. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. Hope you guys are doing well and staying safe. Today I'm here to talk about all the books I read in November, as well as the first few books I read in December. I never posted a November wrap-up, and I have read some really good holiday books which I wanted to share with you before it's kind of like too late to read holiday books. So that's kind of what inspired this recent read slash wrap-up video. So I'm going to go in order of what I read. This obviously will start with all the middle grade books I read for Believe-a-thon, which was a month-long read-a-thon hosted by Gavin at How to Train Your Gavin, which consists of reading different middle grade books to find clues, as well as I mentioned the first books I read in December. The first book I read for Believe-a-thon was The Strangers, which is the first book in the Greystone Secret series by Margaret Peterson Haddix, and this book I gave a 3 out of 5 stars. Honestly, more of a 2.5, but when it comes to middle grade, I try not to be so harsh with my critique because I'm obviously not the intended audience. But this follows 3 different siblings, and we get all of their POVs in this book, and basically they live with their mother. Their father actually has passed away years ago, so it's always been them and their mother. And at the beginning of this book, all 3 children come home from school, and usually their mom would be ready with like homemade snacks, and they to kind of greet them and learn about their day before she goes back to work. She works from home, and they come in, find their mother in complete shock and listening to this news coverage that 3 kids with the same names and birth dates as the children we follow in this book have been kidnapped, and she kind of goes on this work trip mysteriously, and it's the children trying to figure out what exactly is happening while being under the supervision of this woman they don't know. It's basically them solving mysteries, which end up being very predictable in my opinion, even for the intended audience. Like, you can clearly see where this is going, and it's the start of a series. For me, this was a lot too much of a setup and not a lot of action. I think that I got bored very quickly because I just think that when you're throwing so much information but you're not actually throwing out any plot, and it's just a big setup for like the next book, not the best time in my opinion. I also think that the writing is a little bit choppy, but then again, who am I to critique writing, because I'm not a published author, so take that with a grain of salt, but I just didn't really like the overall vibes and the atmosphere. However, I did enjoy the characters in here for the most part. I think that they were very believable for the age and life experiences that they had. I think that was my favorite part of the book, and by the end, the mystery did get a little bit more interesting, but overall, it just was very middle of the road, kind of mediocre, and I will not be continuing on with this series. I then read The Castle of Tangled Magic by Sophie Anderson, which was my first Sophie Anderson book, but their 3rd book actually published, and I can't wait to read the other ones. I ended up going with a 4 out of 5 stars. Well, the rating off Cawpile was 4 out of 5 stars. If you don't know what Cawpile is, it's a rating system created by G at Book Roast. I'll leave it in the description. This is a fantastic middle grade, and it really shocked me how much I enjoyed this. This is the story of Olia, I believe. I never know how to pronounce her name. I'm going to say Olia, who lives in this castle, kind of like what it looks here, and it has a bunch of different domes. Her family used to be royal, but they aren't anymore. Like, they're not descendants of royal. Her parents are strictly carpenters, but they live in this big castle and host all the town events. However, at the beginning of this book, there is a huge storm, and it's kind of like up to Olia to save the castle and its people. Essentially, what is happening is that in this novel, her grandmother, the grandmother of Olia, believes in magic. Her father not so much, and her mother's like, I could go either way. And she keeps talking to Olia about the magic that is trapped in this castle, and essentially it's that magic that is creating the huge storm, and it will destroy the castle if our main character cannot solve the relying issue. And in order to do so, she is actually transported into a different world. She goes on an adventure with a fox who can turn into a half-man, and has a lot of lessons that she learns along the way. The number one thing for me in this book was absolutely the writing. The writing style of Sophie Anderson honestly blew me away from page 1. I was absolutely entranced, and there's kind of like a mix of folklore and magic, and everything about this book, the descriptions, I could vividly see the animals, and there are some illustrations in here as well, and just the combination of the formats, and I usually am not super picky with my writing, but I have to say this has to be one of my favorite writing styles ever, and the explanation and the logic for the world were really well done as well. I think that it hit for a targeted audience, but I don't read a lot of fantasy, and I feel like this was fleshed out enough for me to vividly understand what was going on, and it just, honestly, I don't really have any complaints. I just think it's not as top tier as maybe like the Nevermore series or The Mystery of Black Hollow Lanes, which I was blanking on. Those are like my top tier, so that's kind of what I compare other middle grades to, but this was more like a 4.5. Really, it was almost there, but the rest of them, highly recommend. Then I read another book which I have conflicting feelings about, and that is Tamarind and the Star of Ishta. And this is a book that I know has a lot to do with mythology and folklore, and I think that for that in of itself, it creates a valuable read and like a valuable book in of itself. However, I did not really vibe with the story and ended up going with a 3 out of 5 stars. I think that for what the story is intending to do, there's a lot of significance and importance, and so that's kind of where my reading went. But for the enjoyment level and for my preference in writing style and plot devices, not a fan. This follows a young girl who is named Tamarind, who has never really known her mom. She lives with her father, who is getting remarried, and they are going on a honeymoon, like her father and the woman she's actually marrying, and they're going back to India, which is where Tamarind's mother is originally from. And because Tamarind can't actually go on the honeymoon with her dad, he actually brings her to meet her mother's family for the first time, and so she spends some time there discovering her origins and her family. And also there's this kind of like sideline where she meets this young girl at night who wants to play, and it's just very weird. I did not like the pacing and the writing style in this book, if I'm completely honest. It really fell flat, and I was kind of bored reading this, but as I said, it's culturally important, and I can't rate someone else's culture. Like, for that element alone, I know there is value in this, but I just don't really care for this book. The last middle grade book I read was Pages & Co., the first book, which is Tilly and the Book Wanderers by Anna James, and wow, was this a fun time. I think I rated it 4 out of 5 as well, because that's what it fell on Copile, but again, probably closer to a 4.5. This is the first book in a series, and I cannot wait to get my hands on the rest of the series and read them. This follows a young girl who is named Tilly, and she lives in a bookshop with her grandparents, and Tilly has never met her father because I believe he passed away when she was very young, and she actually never saw him, and his family, like Tilly's family, was not close to that man, and her mother actually disappeared, and so Tilly has been brought up with her grandparents who own a bookshop. And essentially this story starts out when Tilly is like on school break, and so she has to write this paper on one of her favorite characters, and she is hesitating between Anne of Anne of Green Gables as well as Alice from Alice in Wonderland. Turns out both of the characters actually come out of the page and into real life, and Tilly is also transported into their worlds, and so she learns that she is essentially a book wanderer, and it's something that happens in her family, and it's kind of her discovering what that means, as well as like coming to grips with a lot of other things. I don't want to spoil it, but again, the writing in this one, fabulous. This was such a creative novel, and I had such a blast reading it. It just transports you somewhere else, and I mean, who would not want to be able to go into your favorite books? And just the logic as well in this one, like the rules and the setup for this book and how the book wandering actually works is really explained, and like the consequences and the unknowns and just the whole setup behind it. I loved. There's kind of a villain in this book as well, which was so fun to learn about and to kind of see the repercussions of, and I just had a blast. I highly recommend this series. Then I read a graphic novel, which was Snot Girl Volume 1, which is Green Hair Don't Care, and I don't care about this one at all. I ended up giving it a 2 out of 5 stars. This has a strong suit, which is the illustrations in this. I really appreciated the color scheme and the illustrations, but this is not at all what I expected it to be, and I was very disappointed. This basically follows a fashion blogger who has severe allergies, and so she kind of hides those allergies in her photos and whatever she does. However, it becomes problematic when she goes out and kind of does her social influencer things because she needs to hide her allergies, and this is something I struggle with pretty much all the time. I have asthma, and because of that my allergies are very annoying. Like, I have to wake up in the morning and I spend like 3 hours feeling kind of gross, and you know, not gonna go into it, but I thought I could maybe relate to the character, and it ended up being something completely different. This main character hates her friends. She is very fake, and I don't know why she's like going through all the crap she's going through, because she could really change her faith if she wanted to, but she ends up going to the doctors to get new allergy medication, and they're doing this testing on her. It's a different doctor, and she ends up also meeting this girl who's also a fashion blogger, and they decide to go out together for a night, and that girl ends up dying. Our main character thinks she killed her, but then that girl kind of reappears, and it's the mystery of is she dead or not. Did our main character kill her? She didn't turn herself in, and now she's freaking out. We don't know if it's the allergy meds that are like making her hallucinate things, and it just got really weird and really not my style. The content in here sucked. I was not believable. I was not enthralled. I didn't care for the mystery. The friendships were terrible, and I don't recommend this graphic novel series one bit. And then we go into the 2 holiday books that I read and want to recommend for you guys before. Yeah, I have 3 books left, 2 of them which are holiday books. So the first one is actually more of a novella, and that is The Christmas Blanket by Candy Steiner. This is a book I've seen no one talk about on YouTube, and it is a recent release. I would recommend maybe going for the Kindle version because this is very tiny and short to read, but I'm really happy I have a copy because I loved it, and I think it's something I'm going to reread constantly. This follows a girl who got married when she was very young, and things didn't end up going like she wanted them to, and she ended up leaving town to kind of follow her heart and go on adventures, and she's left her hometown for 4 years now. She's left her family and everything, but one Christmas she decides that she's going to go back to her hometown and surprise her parents. However, she doesn't really take the good precautions because she ends up being stuck in a snowstorm, and her car is in the ditch, and obviously she can't get home, and she's very close to getting home, and this man offers help, and when she turns around it ends up being her ex-husband. There's nothing else that they can do, and so he brings her into his home until the storm passes, and it's her rekindling with her ex-husband, and it's like the close proximity. Just so many wonderful, cozy things. I gave it 5 stars because for a novella it was excellent. I had so much fun. It had all the warm and fuzzies, and you kind of felt for each of the characters in here and wanted them to get back together, even though it was such a short novella, and they were really struggling but also able to kind of talk it out, and this is all the warm and cozy feels. It talks about Christmas traditions and the past and the future, and sometimes realizing that what you thought you wanted isn't what you want. And there's so many things in here, and I just don't want to say too much because it's like 150 pages long. But I highly recommend. This is super cheap on Kindle, and I even think it's on Kindle Unlimited if you have KU. So if you're looking for a sweet holiday novella, look no further. But the real showstopper here, and the reason I wanted to talk about my December reads as well, is because I read One Way or Another by Kara McDowell. First of all, I have mentioned before, this author is the sweetest bean I've ever seen. She followed me back on Twitter, we're mutuals, and I kept tweeting about this book, and she was just so nice. And I'm getting overwhelmed here, but this book is a YA novel, and I feel like it's one of the rare YAs that I loved. this year, and this definitely has to make it to my top 10 of the year. And it follows a main character named Paige, who really does suffer with anxiety and making decisions. And at the beginning of this book, she is invited by her best friend, who is like her unrequited crush. Like, she's crushing on him hard, but he doesn't know. She hasn't told him. And like, he keeps dating other people, whatever, it's not, they end up breaking up, and then he goes back to Paige and their friends, and he ends up inviting her to his cabin for her to be able to see snow for the first time, as he promised he would for years. And she gets really excited, but then when she gets home, her mom actually won tickets to go to New York City, which has been a dream for a main character for such a long time. She's really struggling to like decide what she actually wants to do, and goes and talks to her friend about it. She actually hits her head, and then the story splits in two, and you follow both timelines. One of where Paige goes with her friend to the cabin, and the other where Paige goes with her mother to New York City. And each chapter ends on like a mini cliffhanger, and you just keep going and going. The romance in here is absolutely adorable. The anxiety representation was 100% believable. I struggled to make decisions on the daily, and I could relate to Paige in incredible ways. The holiday feels in here, and the fact that our main character sees snow for the first time, and the different holiday traditions, and New York City at Christmas time, and all of it is incredible, and I want you to pick this up. If you're a YA reader, if you like contemporaries, Christmas stories, stories that have to do with mental health, just want a good book this holiday season. I read this in one sitting, in one day. I actually read both of these together on the same day, and oh my god, you guys, I was physically reacting to this book. I had so much fun, and I connected to the character, and this is a book I'm going to reread every year, and that I'm so incredibly happy I have in my collection, and I want you guys to read it. And then we have a more depressing book, but a book I also gave 5 stars, because if I didn't mention, I gave one way or the other 5 stars, and that is Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is a book I had mentioned in my October wrap-up that I had started reading. I put it on hold in November for Believe-a-thon and decided to finish it as it was on my CANDYLAND TBR for the month of December. And my god, this book, 5 out of 5 stars, and wow. Trigger warnings will be listed in the description, I just said that, if you're interested at all in reading this book, because it does deal with a lot of heavy topics. This follows a main character who is 17 years old. Her name is Enchanted, and her dream is to become a singer. She has not been trained to be a singer, but she has a very beautiful voice. However, her parents have a lot of children, they kind of struggle to make ends meet, and they don't think it's a viable option for a main character to keep following that path. Our main character, however, tricks her mother into going into this audition, and her mother is kind of like, oh, okay, whatever. And although she doesn't end up making the audition, this very famous man named Corey Fields, who is 28 years old, actually takes notice of our main character and is like, hey, we should like keep in contact, maybe record a song together, I really like your voice. And the story kind of unfolds, and our main character ends up going on this tour with this man named Corey, and she also, you know, as a 17-year-old, is really in awe of this man and really comes to like him, and he actually kind of hits on her, and they have this kind of like secret relationship where he's like, the world wouldn't understand, blah blah blah. Ends up being the worst man ever. So not only is there like a 11-year age gap, which when you're 40 and 50 that doesn't show as much, but when you're 28 and 17 it's a big gap. And he ends up being very, very cruel, and our main character obviously at first is like, I love him, and you know, he's not always like that, he says sorry, and then as time advances and as it gets worse, our main character realizes that she is stuck and very afraid, and her parents try to come in contact with her and nothing is working out, and it's her story being told and the trauma that comes with it. It's inspired by a lot of actual things that happen in our world, and how sometimes the people who are in power and have stardom and are celebrities get away with things they shouldn't get away with because they are famous, and obviously they wouldn't do that. And it tackles a lot of different things, and coming out in the world and saying that you've been assaulted, and it really packs a punch. There's also a mystery element in here because the first chapter literally is that this man is actually dead and their main character is filled with blood, and so you go kind of like in the past when they meet, and that kind of timeline gradually increases, and you also go to now, like the present time, where obviously our main character is full of blood and she doesn't know what's happened. And it tackles so many different things. My heart broke, and I felt for this character, and I think it's such an important story, and I respect every choice that the author made in this book 100%. And there's an added discussion in here because our main character is actually black, and there's this discourse that black women are the most misunderstood and unheard when these things happen to them. It's hard for women in general, but black women have it even harder, and I think this book just did a wonderful job at tackling it. It has like a 4.3 rating on Goodreads, which means, you know, it was done good and people have been appreciating it. It's not a fun book to read, but it's really important, and so I highly recommend it if it's something you think you can handle. So that was my very long and chatty recent reads video. I really hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know in the comments what you've read recently, or if any of these books actually interest you, and I'll see you tomorrow with another video. Also, sorry there was no Bookmas Day 10. Finals have happened. I'm officially done with school and on winter break now, and I'll see you tomorrow, guys. Bye!